worked with different stakeholders. We worked with primary teachers, secondary teachers. We worked with the English as Additional Language unit here, affiliated with the Glasgow City Council, and also the library. And we also worked with creative artists to develop the activities that we will share with you. But both projects had these three main targets. We were looking at how do we understand at this moment this framework of translanguaging, which is a buzz term and a difficult term to work with as well. So we were trying to understand how teachers and language practitioners adopt this term and develop new activities for the classroom and for community work as well. We were interested in developing teacher training so that teachers can feel confident developing activities from a translingual approach. And our focus was to bring in arts-based methods into our work because we wanted to push the boundaries of what we can do with languages and to do it with the help of creative artists. So these were the three principles that guided our work. You can see the team. The top three people are here with you. And I want to very briefly acknowledge the work of Elizabeth, Sarah, and Richie. All three being the creative artists that, who joined us throughout these projects and who helped us push the boundaries of creativity. So let me talk very briefly about the research basis. We started thinking about what are the metaphors that we use when we think about what languages are. When we are to explain what a language is or what we do with languages, what kind of metaphors do we use? And we discovered in our research that oftentimes we talk about languages in terms of tools because we say, I use English to do certain things, right? I use French to communicate, so on and so forth. So this idea of usage conceptualizes language as a tool. In other cases, we talk about languages as containers. So we say, I did this problem in French, or I communicated this in Arabic. And in other cases, we talk about languages as objects, things that we take in school. I take English, I take French, right? But oftentimes we are very personal in our language, and we talk about languages as possessions. And we talk about how my Arabic is not great, because it's not. My French is okay, but we talk about languages as if they are things that we possess, that belong to us. Now, translanguaging as a framework of thinking pushes these metaphors and is inviting us to think about the definition of languages in new ways. And by thinking about languages in new ways and through different metaphors, that also may enable us to do different kinds of things in order to learn new languages. So this was the focus of our work. So what is translanguaging? This is a big question that we developed we explored through our projects. But just to give you a definition, a tentative definition in a nutshell, we thought about languaging rather than language. So when we engage with languages, we engage in practices of doing language. That's why we are very much interested in the doing aspect of languages. Translanguaging is also ordinary. It is something that multilingual speakers do on a daily basis because they draw not only on one language system, but on multiple language systems that are integrated and activated all the time. Translanguaging is creative because every time we reach out to the world to communicate something, we do it again by drawing on all those resources combined. And it's also inclusive because, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, learning a new language is not about isolating that language, but it's about recognizing and acknowledging all the resources that you bring in when you are opening yourself to a new language. Translanguaging as a framework inspires all learners to value all their communicative resources. And by that, we don't mean only words or sentence structures, but also images, body language, artistic and digital forms. And finally, translanguaging supports positive attitudes and capitalizes on this curiosity for knowing more in one language or another, or knowing more by bringing together different languages. Now, we are in a context that is slightly different from where we started with our project. So what we began to think about was, what are the new challenges and what are the new conditions that give the context of how we can build activities for our language learners. So here you have a couple of considerations about the things that you might take into account as we go forward and engage with our language learners. One of them being that we may be confined, but creativity has no boundaries. So even if you are at home, the home can become a space of creativity. And that creativity can be achieved by understanding that language is not something that we only do in a particular mode, but it's that idea of engaging the mind, the hand, the body, the environment in which you find yourself in order to learn languages. So creative activities ask learners to use all modes and media of communication. Another important element is that we are in a context where many of our pupils or students, however you want to call your learners, are in contexts where intergenerational learning happens. They are in the presence of their parents, friends, carers. So there is a strong opportunity for learning with. So it's not just learning a language, if we go back to the idea of metaphors, but it's about learning with people in languages. So learning happens in the family, with friends, with carers, with everybody else, and activities can be tailored with that in mind. A lot of the present conversations are talking about how we should prepare the activities. Should we go synchronous? Should we go asynchronous? And I think a different way of thinking about this binary is to think about learning in place. Where are your learners? And what do the places where they are allow them to do? And that could extract you a little bit out of that synchronous asynchronous divide, and again think more creatively about what can be done in the places where they are. The activities that we can plan should take into account the short-term engagement, so activities that give pupils a short period of time where they focus on the task, but also take into account the possibility of that task becoming part of a project. And the activities that we have created and we share with you are activities that take both dimensions into account. They can be done very quickly, but then they can be extended for a longer period of time, and they can become a project. And finally, this is something that I'm sure many of you have taken into account, the aspect of independence. We cannot count on parents to help our learners to learn, although we want them to engage with the learning. So the activities that we propose could be done either independently or with support. So we have, as I said, a language suitcase toolkit, and this is present on our website. And the language suitcase toolkit actually also has a presence. My video is doing funny things, but it has a physical presence in a suitcase. But we have made available all the activities that we packed in the suitcase on our website. Those activities are addressing you as practitioners, and you can take those activities and share them with your learners as they are, or you can adapt them to your context. We understand that, and we encourage adaptation because contexts are going to be very different, and the materials that pupils can access are highly different as well from one context to another. But the underlying principle that we want to highlight is that activities need to encourage learners to use all their communicative resources in a continuously integrated way, taking into account not just the target language that they may be working towards, but also the languages that they have at that time available in their spaces, in their homes. In light of the current situation, we have started developing new activities, And these are present on our blog, and these activities are uploaded in a Word document. So again, you can download and adapt them, so you can tinker with the content. And we also have an empty template if you want to use the general framework of our activities, and you can populate it with your content. But what I want to highlight is that we also invite you to be part of this effort. And if you develop new sheets, if you develop new ideas, please feel free to send them and share them with us, because we would be more than happy to integrate them in the website and to make them available to other practitioners as well. And one last thing before I pass on to my colleague Sally Zacharias. We have made an effort to translate some of these documents, some of these activity sheets. At the moment, we have translations for some of the activities in Polish and Romanian. We're going to keep on adding some of these translations. But again, if you do translations in Spanish, Arabic, or any of the other languages that your learners use, then please share those with us, because again, we would be very happy to add them to our website and to make them available. So now I'll pass on to Sally, and both Sally and Dubrovna are going to share some practical ideas on how these activities might look like. Sally, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Lavinia. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. So I'm going to talk about a translanguaging activity that's based on the idea of idioms. So idioms are everyday expressions, so like time flies, I'm over the moon, I'm head over heels in love, and so on. And we use these expressions to talk about abstract concepts like time and love. And these concepts are often quite difficult to conceptualize and express. So we use idioms and these are everyday expressions to make this job easier for us. So we use quite concrete everyday things like birds and flying to talk about abstract concepts like time. So hence time flies. Okay, so sometimes you have that feeling that you know, time is passing really quickly, and it's to make, you know, to express that we use the idiom time flies. And the interesting thing is all languages have idioms, but they differ because of our cultural diversity. You know, languages, despite them being all interconnected, they differ because they've evolved differently. But what's really fun and interesting about idioms is that we can work out the meaning of the idiom, even if it's in another language, even if we haven't come across it before. And this is because the meaning is often derived from a kind of image schematic structure. So what I mean by this is if you've got an idiom, let's say in French, you've got être dans la lune, to be in the moon, which is a bit like the English expression, your head is in the clouds. And you can work out a little bit the meaning from this because it's our thoughts are sort of being conceptualized as being in a separate space. And then the other example, I love you to the moon and back, the meaning is derived a bit from that feeling of long distance, so that you know, that refers to, you know, that feeling of being in love and so on. So what's really great about this is that you can guess often the meaning of these idioms. And this is what makes them really good fun for translingual activities, because learners can draw on these structures, image schematic structures, to try and work them out. as well as their knowledge about culture, about languages they speak as well. So it can make them a really, really good thing to do with, for learners to do. So what I'm going to describe now is a little activity that you could do with your learners at home. So what you can ask your learner then to think of idioms that they know. So it could be in English, it can be in any language that they know, and if they get stuck, they could perhaps ask a family member or a friend. And then the next thing is ask them to translate it, so word for word translation. And to do this, they could use Google Translate to do it. So, for example, if it were être dans la lune, it would be to be in the moon. Okay, so that's the literal translation there. And then the next thing is that then with someone else, they can ask them, maybe a parent or a friend, to guess the meaning of that idiom from the literal translation. And then just see if they've got that right or not. And then finally, they can draw the idiom. So either the literal, word for word translation, or what it actually means, the real translation of it. So you can do lots of really fun things with idioms, and it gets them to use a lot of resources that they have, and a lot of sort of knowledge frameworks, language about culture, language about English or another language that they speak. And it can be a very multimodal activity as well, because they're writing and drawing as well. So that's a really good fun activity. There's a description of that on the blog as well. So I'll hand you over now to De Brochner, I think, who's going to talk some more. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Following on Sally's introduction of idioms, I would like to share with you another activity that has to do with idioms, and I can see that.
Brochner, could I ask you to speak slightly louder, if you can?
Yes.
Or
yes.
Closer to the microphone? Yeah.
Okay, let me just move closer. Yeah.
Thank you. We can hear you, but I think the voice is a little bit in the background. Yeah. Thank you, and sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. No, that's fine. So again, coming back to the activity I would like to share with you. The activity is inspired by the work of Marc Chagall. And you can either Google his work or ask your learners to Google the work, or you can use the activities and the PowerPoint presentation available on our project website. I usually start with talking about Marc Chagall and his work, and just discussing his work, which includes a lot of interesting situations, unusual activities. We can see in his paintings people flying, cows laying eggs. There is also a self-portrait of an artist with 7 fingers. We talked about it for a little bit, and then we start talking about idioms, because I explained to the children that for those who know Yiddish and Russian as the artist did, the paintings are not as unusual, because the activities he created, the paintings, the depictions in his paintings are actually based on Yiddish idioms. So, for example, painting himself with 7 fingers, he referred to a Yiddish idiom, doing something with all 7 fingers, which means doing something very well with all energy, with one's whole being. If you want to focus on just one painting, I would suggest the painting of Paris Through the Window, which is linked to this presentation, which we will share later. You will find in this painting several idioms depicted by Chagall. After talking about it, and it usually turns into a really interesting game of finding funny things and trying to understand what they may mean, exactly as Sally explained in her previous activity. After doing it, I moved to the practical part. So I give children a selection of idioms in many languages. Again, this can be downloaded from our project website. And I ask them to select one idiom from one language and another idiom from a different language. So every child cut out the idiom, they cut out idioms from 2 languages. And then I ask them to create, similarly to what Chagall did in his paintings, depiction of 2 idioms that has a meaning, that is that the composition of 2 idioms, and then at the end they cut the sentences into separate words and add them to the composition. So as you can see in the PowerPoint presentation here, they created depiction of some people, and each person has a different character. So has a different feature. For example, this man here has tomato in his or her eyes, and it is a German idiom that describes someone who doesn't see things everyone else is seeing. This one is a depiction of an idiom of someone sharpening an axe on another's head, which depicts the stubbornness of a person. Then you have different idioms, like, for example, here, you would see an English idiom, raining cats and dogs, and the beautifully added text. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this lines are lines of text that beautifully compose in blue with the drops of rain. So we have raining cats and dogs, and then we have picking mushrooms, which is again a Latvian saying, telling someone to go away. And when children are given this opportunity, they usually either depict, and can we go back, Lavinia, to the previous slide? So they depict either figurative meaning or literal meaning of the idioms, and then you can discuss it. You can also make a game of guessing what idiom it is, and this way enhance the understanding of the idioms. Then another activity I'm going to talk about is an activity based on the work of Monika Szydłowska. So as you can see here, her work looks a little bit like a comic book, but it is an artist book she created when she moved from Poland to Scotland. And it started from her depicting activities and situations she encountered in her new country, what she heard, what she saw around her, and what she found strange or interesting or funny, or just something that struck her at the moment. What I do with children, I talk again about her work, and I ask them why they think she thought it is worth being depicted or described or captured in the form of an image and bubble speech, a speech bubble. And then I propose the activity where they are asked to continue the story that starts with a drawing by Monica. So, for example, here we have the conversation that combines French and English. And then we have a child who created a next frame where the protagonist decides to teach a person who doesn't know Polish how to say hello in Polish. Another activity, if we go on another slide. Lavinia, can we have another slide, please? Thank you. Yeah, so another activity I would suggest once they feel comfortable with creating comics, painting and drawing, painting images and writing text in speech and thought bubbles, would be a little bit more independent. So this time without Monica's drawings, you ask children to think and to look around them and listen carefully what people say, and depict exactly as she did activities and situations and conversations they found striking or funny in their own little journal. There is also the third activity that can follow after these two, and this activity is completely independent. They can create their own story in which they are completely free to use any languages they want, any techniques they want, and create their own story using images and languages. So yes, so that's the two activities, which are the selection of what you will find on our website, on our project website.
Thank you very much, Dobrona. And one thing that I would like to add is that you've heard contexts where we have implemented some of these activities in classrooms with pupils in the same space, and some of these activities we have tweaked them and we have adapted them so that they are used in the space of the home. And these two variations, again, you can find them on two different places on our website. One is the Language Suitcase Toolkit, which includes the full set of activities that were developed for the classroom. And then on our blog, we are uploading activities and activity sheets that you can use and that we have adapted for home use. I would also like to bring back some of the things that have guided us as we were redesigning some of our activities. And I'm aware that in current circumstances, we are looking at adaptations of things that we already do really well, but we are trying to see how can we repurpose these for the context of the home. And the four main things that we would like to kind of bring together is that are the following ones. The fact that language learning at this point is about being in different languages at the same time. For our multilingual pupils, they are at home where they might speak a different language than a target language that they are working towards. It is about languaging together, doing language together. They are not working separate on their notebooks, but there's always a back and forth between what they are doing and what the parents are doing and what everything else happens in the home. This ties to the third point, that learning languages is about learning languages in place, and we have to take into account what does it mean to be in the place where our pupils are, and then adapt the activities that we are working, that we want them to do to those conditions. And finally, but equally important, a lot of us are going through emotional work. Staying at home in a lockdown or anywhere else at this point, it's about emotional work. And language learning can be a vehicle to not only learn new things in another language, but also to care, to play, to feel hopeful, to feel safe, and to have fun. So these are some of the things that we're kind of taking and keeping in mind as we develop activities. Here you have our 2 resources, and you can Google by the title, and the recording will be available, so you can access these. As I said, they are free to download, and some of the activities on the blog are also tweakable, because you'll get a Word document that you can change. And these are our emails if you are interested to contact us. And that's about all in terms of the presentation bit of the webinar. And now we would like to take this opportunity to open it up to questions and conversations. So I'll close this. I'll stop sharing my screen at this point, and then we can take some of the questions. Let me see if we can go to Q&A.
There's some good ones. There are a couple about level here, and I think you can start. I mean, it probably works better with slightly older primary school children and almost into secondary, so a young secondary school children as well. But, you know, I take the view that, you know, young children also do have a sort of figurative competency as well. They do understand figurative language, idiomatic language. But maybe you need to explain it a little bit more, and you know, play with it. But they will have heard of idiomatic phrases, you know, or time flies, or you know, to kill time. You know, their parents might have said, "Oh, how can we kill time today?" or so on. So it's not that they won't have heard these phrases because they're everyday phrases. It's just perhaps they understand them holistically. They haven't thought that how they work. So I think these activities are a great opportunity of playing with the language, but also getting them to learn about the language and how language works anyway. So I think I'm not sort of prescribing an age level here, and I think it depends very much on the learner as well. So yeah.
So Brooke, you want to jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
You have to turn on your mic. No, it still doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. So yes, definitely. Yeah, I personally use the idiom activity with children, with very young children, beginning at the age of 6 or 5. But then in this activity, they work with their parents, and they didn't focus that much on the figurative meaning of the idiom, but rather enjoyed painting the literal meaning of the idioms. But it was an opportunity to introduce them to the fact that there are 2 meanings of idioms or sayings. With older children, you can stress a little bit more the figurative meaning, and I had amazing sessions with children in the upper primary, so between the age of 9 to 11. But I also worked with adults who came to the workshop in the gallery, and I enjoyed sharing idioms from their own languages and finding creative ways of combining them and using languages from using idioms from multiple languages, which is an answer to the question asked on the chat, I think, or maybe in the Q&A, I spotted at some point, if you use more than one idioms in one painting. Yes, this is why the Chagall's painting, Paris Through the Window, is the best example, because you combine more than one idiom from more than one languages in one painting, which is exactly what multilinguals do. They never switch off one language. They always have 2 or more languages activated in their brain, and they can use them. And this activity shows how beneficial and creative it is to know more than one language.
And I guess some of the things that were coming up, Elena, I think, said that she used, she taught to her daughter the expression "I love you to the moon and back," and she's, I think, 5 years old or something like that. So it's really a matter of scaling up and down depending on who your learners are. You know, you could send them an idiomatic phrase, and then you can ask them to find its meaning or its equivalent in another language and make a drawing. It doesn't need to be, 10 or 20 idiomatic phrases. It needs to be fun. It needs to, it should engage them into learning and loving languages, developing that curiosity for knowing more. And I want to know how this can be said in your language. One interesting question that I picked up was this idea of motivating parents to get involved. And this has been a really important dimension of our research, a really important finding, in the sense that while teachers were providing this creative space in many cases where they were encouraging pupils to learn and to bring in all the languages that they know, at home, parents would have the tendency of saying, yes, at home you speak this language, at school you speak this language. So trying to separate them out. But here we are in a context where everybody is at home and we have all the resources with us. And what we try to do, we try to make an active effort to incorporate other languages and invite other languages as part of the activity. So the activity is about not just learning English, but it's about learning English in relation to your mother tongue or to other languages that your parents may be familiar with. The other element was the issue of translation. So if you know the languages of some of your pupils, translating the activity sheet and sending it at home in their home language actually sets up a different context. So we have, as I said, Romanian translations because I know Romanian. So hello to everybody who's from Romania. There were a couple of people there. But we have some translation in Polish, and we invite translations in many other languages because it's one thing for an activity sheet to arrive in a home where English probably is not the first language spoken, and to arrive in a language of that home. That's a different kind of invitation for engaging with the context and the content of the activity. Yeah. Any other questions that you picked up on? There are lots, and thank you.
Yeah, I know, I'm scrolling through them.
It's so hard to pick.
I read a question of Muhammad, who asked, if I am teaching in a class of students speaking different languages, but I know only one language myself, then how can I take benefit of this approach?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, what I would say there is two things, really. Translanguaging is quite a learner-centered approach. So it's the learner who is driving in the driving seat. So it's they will be wanting to find out, hopefully, or you'll be setting up environments where you're encouraging them to be curious about other languages. So they'll be using, hopefully, their resources to find out about maybe their own home language, but also perhaps the target language of the classroom, if you are at the moment working in a classroom. Or if you're at home, they might have 2 or 3 languages surrounding them, and it's really encouraging them to find out about it. And that involves maybe the teacher just letting go of the reins and trusting them to find out about the language. And I know as teachers, we're quite nervous about doing that. We like to be in control. We're very much aware, they're here to learn the target language. And I say, well, yes, but they learn that target language through other languages, through their own language as well. So it's this constant dialogue between what they come into the classroom with, what languages, what resources they have, and then learning, the target language through that. So what I would say is that sometimes you just have to let go and trust them, and and provide spaces where they can play with these languages, and then maybe rein them in a little bit, and then say, okay, let's focus on the target language together, and it's this constant dialogue and going back and forth. So that would be my response to that.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And to add to that, I think going back to the metaphors, right? If we go into a classroom and we hold on to the language that we teach because it's ours to teach, that gets us into the metaphor of language as a possession, right? And somebody was asking, can we elaborate more on this idea of language as a fluid? Yeah. And I'll share a very brief and kind of personal example. The other day we were walking outside, and my son was keeping track of how many steps he did, and we were talking about this whole idea of the magical number of 10,000 steps per day in order to be healthy. So at some point he says, "Oh, today I did 2 me." So that's, I'll put it in the chat and I'll explain what it means. So 2 is the English for 2. Me is thousands. So but it's in Romanian. So he conveyed the message of 2000s, but half of it was in English, half of it was in Romanian, and he realized that very quickly. And it came out of nowhere. It just, and that's translanguaging. That's when you have 2 languages operating at the same time. And then he started playing. Oh, actually, that could be 2 me's. So 2 me. Because it sounded the same, but now he was coming back into English and making equivalences. So he was playing with the words, and he was playing with the languages, and that was that fluid movement between one and the other. And as teachers, I think we have a duty to give the learners not just the content or the language, but to create an environment where they are curious and they explore the language and they fall in love with it because they want to know more. They want to know how do you say to rain cats and dogs in another language? So from that perspective, we came to these activities. And I know we talked a lot about idioms in this particular webinar, but among all our resources, we have other things included in the activities, activities like the language passport, where we can travel, but you can have a language passport that you develop at home. And if you don't have access to the internet, and I know that many of us might not be in the context of having access to the internet, you can use the phone and call your grandma and ask her to tell you a nice idiom or the equivalent of a phrase in her own language. And it's about that creative use of moving in and out of languages that actually prompts children to learn more and to want to explore languages in these creative ways. Was there any other particular question that we wanted to get to? Gosh, it's so hard to.
Can I chip one in? Well,
yes.
Not from me. A few people have raised the point about how in teacher training, for example, we're all taught in most courses you must only use the target language, and of course the concept of translanguaging changes that notion. But how do you persuade other people, particularly people observing you, for example, that learners are engaged in translanguaging rather than using their target language rather than, or using their L1 rather than the target language. David asked that. Olivia points out it's a bit controversial in that kind of context, in some contexts, to use translation. And Kamran refers to the grammar translation method, and people thinking that this sort of thing is actually quite old-fashioned. There's a range of views there. But how do we engage others who may be, if you like, observing us or feeding back to us in this concept of translanguaging literacy?
I'll jump in, and then, you know, Sally and Dobrona, if you want to come in, please do. I'll talk very briefly from the Scottish context perspective, because this is where we have developed this work. So, you know, it's hard to generalize or talk to make it specific for all contexts. So you can adapt and think of this in your context, and think to what extent you need to change things in order for such an approach to be productive and to work in your context. So in the Scottish context, when we worked with primary teachers, and we also worked with secondary teachers as well, as a smaller group, the teachers were very much open to embracing a multilingual context, because they had multilingual speakers who engaged to different degrees with the content. And to some extent, it was that idea that, you know, learners for various reasons might have thought that their languages are not valued. So it starts with valuing the person. It's not just what language do I choose in a class. It starts with understanding the learner as a full person who comes with knowledge of other languages, may not have the knowledge of the target language that you try in your class to teach, but they are a fuller package. So the teachers were very much interested in adopting strategies that would open up and acknowledge the other knowledges that learners were bringing to the table. Where we did find some resistance from their perspective was the wider community. As I said, there was a situation where we had a teacher who told us anecdotally that one parent came and said, I do Arabic at home. That's what we speak. In school, I hope that my child will be taught in English, and English alone. So that resistance and that view came from the parents, which is why for us, developing these activities was even more important, because this gives us an opportunity to reach the parents, because these activities are going to land in the homes where the pupils are. I don't think it's an easy work, because we're talking about language ideologies, things that we have believed in. And if you believe that the language is a contained entity, then it's very hard to shift that view into new ways. But it doesn't mean it cannot be done. So a lot of the things that our teachers have done, they have taken the activities out in the community, and they have started engaging parents and having parents come in the school and doing activities together, where not only English was taught, but also all these other languages were making their way into the activities.
And also, I mean, Steve's question is really interesting, I think, also from a CLIL perspective. So if you are in a country and maybe you only have 2 hours of English a day, so the concern is, I don't want them to speak their mother tongue, because they don't have then, they should be immersed in English. I've got a CLIL background, so I've taught English, science and geography through the medium of English, and that's really taught me that meaning is the most important. So even though in a situation where the target is to learn, let's say, English, I think there are times in the lesson where the focus has to be on meaning and for the learners to understand the content. And there are times where that is best done in whatever resources they have available, whether it is their own language, the target language, pictures, whatever, and then you can then focus more on the target language. So I think you have to adapt this notion to the context you're in. So for us in Scotland, in mainstream schools, that there was, they embraced this idea of multilingualism, whereas maybe in other contexts, you use it differently. You play with that idea differently. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, thanks ever so much. I mean, there are lots and lots of questions, so we could be here till Christmas answering a lot of them, but I'm sure we've all haven't got till Christmas, unfortunately. But thank you ever so much. We've had, we've had an amazing response from all the participants. All 1,000 of them. We've had 1,000 people in. So yes, and obviously in the chat and the questions. So fantastic. Thank you ever so much for a really useful and engaging presentation to all of you, Lavinia, Deborah, and Sally. Thank you, and also to Steve.